This week on the show, we have NetBSD 8.2 available, NextCloud and OpenBSD. We have more X11 screen locking for you, more and secure, NetBSD and RISC OS running in parallel on one machine. We cover the community feedback about switching to BSDs in this episode and more in this episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 345, Switchers to BSD, recorded on the 8th of April 2020. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Täuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Welcome. We hope this podcast finds you well these days, and you have all the supplies that you need, you're staying inside, and you're good and healthy, and we supply the BSD news for you. This is our service, basically, since forever. And the same this week. We've a little special touch this time, but we'll get to that a little later. So first, we start with the headlines, because it's NetBSD's 8.2 release.
Yep. So here we have a post by Maya Ranash saying the third release in the NetBSD 8 tree is now available. And this release includes all the security fixes in NetBSD-8 up until this point, and other fixes deemed important, including fixed a regression in booting on some older CPUs on x86, improved the Hyper-V Gen 2 virtual machine frame buffer support, various security fixes to their built-in HTTPD, improvements to the IXG driver, EFI boot, they've added TFTP support, fixed issues on machines that have many different memory segments, and improved the graphics mode logic to work on even more machines. They also fixed various kernel memory info leaks. I think that's based on that K-leak paper and work that they've done earlier last year. Updated the version of XPath, fixed some USB issues on the AMD Ryzen platform, and enhanced their support for XHCI to version 3.10. They now accept root device specification in the format of name equals label instead of just device names, and added multi-boot 2 support to all their x86 bootloaders so they can be chain loaded and so on. They also fixed a CVE for key negotiation for Bluetooth, improved the Nouveau, which is the open source NVIDIA driver, and limit the supported devices and fix some firmware loading problems. The Radeon driver fixed the loading of the firmware for the Tahiti class cards, and they stopped using an obsolete DNSSEC leukocyte setting in bind.
Oh, okay. That seems like a decent release. Of course, there are more changes with more detailed in the changes overall in the changelog. I also like the comments down there on this blog post here. Yay, as long as there is no systemd in the changelog, I will gladly use it. So congratulations NetBSD on another point release, and people should check it out, update their systems, and report back how it went. Okay, then next we're switching a little bit to OpenBSD and the things that many people these days need, a NextCloud instance. So this is an article, or more like a how-to, how you can set this up on OpenBSD. And, for the people who have never heard about what NextCloud is, NextCloud and OpenBSD are complementary to one another, they write. NextCloud is an awesome, secure, and private alternative for proprietary platforms, whereas OpenBSD forms the most secure and solid foundation to serve it on. Setting it up is in the best way isn't hard, especially using this step-by-step tutorial. They have a little preface here. When this tutorial was initially written, things were different, in many ways. The OpenBSD port relied on PHP 5.6, and there was no package updates available. But the port improved, hats off to Gonzalo, and package updates were introduced to the stable branch, with hats off to Solin. Rewrite of this tutorial was long overdue. Right now it's written for 6.6 stable and will be updated once 6.7 is released. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out. Okay, onto the installation. First, you install OpenBSD using the install wizard. I guess we have covered this many times in many different ways, so is fairly straightforward by now. Let's switch to step 2, packages. So you need the following packages. NextCloud, of course, obviously. Then they chose Postgres as the backing database, so PostgreSQL-server and, no client, okay, so just the server parts. Then PHP-PDO_PGSQL for connecting PHP to Postgres. And then PECL 7.3-Redis and Redis itself. So these are also the connecting components. Okay, once you have that, there's a ambiguity in the package versions, but you can resolve that with the latest version that you have at this point. And then you start doing 3 soft links from basically the PHP-version string to use a local bin PHP so that you don't have to put in the version all the time and just need to follow the symlinks. Okay, then the database setup is basically switching to the _PostgreSQL user. This is the unprivileged user on OpenBSD for the Postgres database. You create a home directory for this one, or a data directory for the database to live in var Postgres data. Then you run initdb on this file with the Postgres user and UTF-8 encoding and the password, of course, and the algorithm. Then, after you've initialized the Postgres database, you started using rcctl. You enable this first so that it gets started by the next reboot, and you start the database for this current session. And then you set your PSQL-u Postgres, so you connect to your database and set a password. Create a database for your NextCloud instance, so that's where the files will live, or the SQL that you're going to run in a little while. You create the NextCloud user with an encrypted password, of course. Pick a different one than this one in the tutorial, of course. And then you grant all privileges on the database NextCloud to NextCloud. Then you quit PSQL. And step 4 is enabling the PHP extensions. That can be run in a fairly simple shell loop, in a for loop to run over all the etc php-73.sample files, and then do a soft link to those. Yeah, so that's easier to do in a for loop. Then you make a couple changes in php.ini or in php-73ini, which is basically the same as the PHP ini now. Change a couple lines. This is fairly straightforward so that you raise the memory limit a little bit and make the server a little bit more secure. Save and exit this, and then you run rcctl again to enable PHP 7.3 FPM. And start this, of course, as well for the current session. Same, you do this for our Redis. You enable it and start it. Web server, you use, of course, OpenBSD HTTPD, which is change rooted, of course. And that way, you need to make sure that host names can be resolved and TLS certificates can be verified from within the change root, of course. And this is simply done with a couple install commands. Then you use the Acme client, of course, to obtain your certificate for the domain that you've chosen. And there's an example config file in case you want to look that up. And then you download the sample config. They provided a sample configuration for HTTPD, so you don't have to type it all in. Then you rcctl HTTPD, of course, enabling and starting it. And then the NextCloud part is also not too complicated. You create in your var www NextCloud instance, you create a file can_install in all caps to allow the installation of NextCloud.
Yeah, that's the security feature that stops you a fresh install from having random people hit it on the internet. You have to, in the file system, create that file, and then it knows that, I should allow the web browser to start configuring it. Mm. And then, there's a config file. You put a couple lines in, and that's good to go. Mm-hmm. And then you set up the cron tab so that NextCloud can do its background bookkeeping, and now you have a NextCloud server.
Yeah, excellent. Safe and secure on OpenBSD and ready for sharing files and all the other services that NextCloud provides. Okay, we're already in the news roundup here. This is nice. We found a nice article about X11 screen locking, a secure and modular approach.
Yes, so this is over on Lee's blog, and they mention, for years they've been using the X screensaver as the default screensaver, but they recently learned about X Secure Lock and are reevaluating their screen saving requirements. So they made a little list here. So the screensaver should turn on and lock on after some configurable amount of time. The screensaver should lock when I press a certain hotkey. The screensaver should lock before my machine suspends, so it's already locked when it unsuspends. It should do authentication via PAM. It should be configurable using XSET, and it should forget to tell SSH agent keys on locking.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no! It should tell the SSH agent to forget all the keys when it locks the machine. Is what they meant.
So they're not in memory anymore.
They also would like to be able to disable the screensaver when giving a presentation easily.
Oh yes, classic.
And the screensaver should display a pretty demo. When I just use X screensaver, they have a number of issues. They say locking before suspend was not so easy. They had to hack using either XAuth as root or additional helper scripts trapping signals in order to actually lock before a suspend. Getting SSH agent to forget keys required a small but additional script. And sometimes X screensaver got stuck, so I had to kill it from a TTY to get back into my machine. And also their XL BIF managed to pop up over top of X screensaver, kind of defeating the privacy point of having a screensaver. After some unsuccessful fiddling with XSS lock and X auto lock, I settled down on a new tool set. So they have X Secure Lock for screen locking and spawning the X screensaver demos, X idle to spawn X Secure Lock after your machine is idle, X bind keys to trigger X idle when you press a hotkey, and ACPID for triggering X idle on lid close. Note that none of this requires systemd, dbus, or anything else that isn't X11 and has been around for 25 years. So they have a quick example of how they put it together. They use a script called run X Secure Lock, which is spawned from their xinitrc, which checks if its argument is lock, then it dumps the keys out of SSH and says, blank the screen after 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes. Set what the password prompt will be, which screensaver they want to use, if they want to reset on auth close, and so on. And that runs X Secure Lock. And then they use X idle to run this script if the machine is idle for 10 minutes. So this runs X idle when you log in with a timeout of 10 minutes and tells it to spawn the script with the lock argument. So it will run X Secure Lock after forgetting all of its SSH agent keys. X Secure Lock then spawns a random X server demo. There's no support for cycling the demos, but you could trigger the dialog and close it, or change the script, whatever you want to do. Then they also used xbind key source and set xset s activate. So when they press insert, it will activate their screensaver. And they say they used to use the pause key for triggering the screensaver, but their Lenovo T480 doesn't have a pause key anymore. So they're using insert now. And then they use ACPID to trigger X idle automatically when the lid is closed. So they say, and note how simple this is as root and doesn't require getting X11 credentials or any complex IPC. And then to disable X idle, they can just do xset s off, and the timeout is configurable at runtime using xset s and some number of seconds. This should satisfy all my requirements and is a cleaner setup than they had before.
Cool. Yeah, this is what you want to have. It's a little bit of typing, but not too much for the script.
Well, basically setting a bunch of environment variables before starting the screensaver to configure it.
Yeah, and then the little handler you set, so you can press a button to enable it. Very nice. Next, we found an article about NetBSD and RISC OS running in parallel. So here in this blog post, they write that I've been experimenting with running two systems at the same time on the RK3399 system on chip. It all began when I figured out how to switch to the A72 CPU for RISC OS. When the switch was done, the A53 CPU just continued to execute code. Okay, my first thought, why not give it something to do? My first step was to run some small programs. It worked. The second thing was switching that CPU to ARch32 and launch RISC OS on that CPU. It worked quite well, but I can't really see the meaning on running two RISC OSs. I decided that NetBSD would be the ideal system to run. So technical details follow. As mentioned, the system boots up at the same time. Some units in the SoC need to be shared, most important the GIC.
Which is the generic interrupt controller.
Yeah, right. With that GIC, I do config in the RISC OS and give affinity to NetBSD for some devices. The console is based on the simple frame buffer and stores its frame buffer at a fixed physical address. My RISC OS client polls that area and creates a sprite with the RISC OS native bitmap format with that area as a buffer. The keyboard works with another shared area. When a key is pressed in RISC OS, I look up the scan code and write that to the keyboard RAM area. As one does. Things on the to-do list here is the mouse driver and network driver with access to the network from the RISC OS, boot NetBSD from within the RISC OS, and copy and paste between the systems. Yeah, that would be nice. Okay, they provided some screenshots that you can find in our show notes. So this seems like a nice project, and so far doesn't look like it's not too bad. Yeah. So just a description here for the screenshots. The first one shows some great creative programs in RISC OS. The Ovation Pro, a fantastic DTP program, desktop publishing. Commercial, available in the Ping Store. Okay. The other program is Draw, a vector drawing application present in the RISC OS ROM and therefore can be run without a disk. Okay, not bad. The second screenshot is showing a busy NetBSD session from where the modkeys first worked.
So it's interesting. On one of these machines that has kind of two different CPUs in it, running two different OSs at the same time and making them cooperate is a very different approach compared to what you do with a typical like BMC or something where you have a big CPU doing all the work and a small CPU that's basically there to reset the other one when it misbehaves or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, multiprocessing in a different way.
But yeah, it's really interesting to think of, using the smaller one as not really like a real-time thing, but something a little closer to that, and then having the big one do the other lifting, or just, separating kind of the bigger tasks from the little ones.
It's like a mathematical coprocessor in the olden days. Like this one is just doing math stuff. This other one is doing the important stuff. I don't know. So maybe that could be a thing. Maybe we'll find a follow-up post in the future where there's more details or how it went. So we'll stay tuned on this. All right. This is the special part of this episode. A couple of weeks ago, a month by now, we covered a story about switching from Linux to BSD. JT and I asked for community feedback as to their thoughts on the matter while Alan was out that week recovering. So this will give him an opportunity here to chime in with his thoughts as well. The first one, so we got a couple people sending emails and replies to us. Thanks for that. And the first one that we have listed here is Jamie about dumping Linux for BSD. He writes that, hi guys, since you asked for it, here it is. So here we go. First, I totally disagree with you about the positive way being the easiest. Sadly, people are wired to more easily remember the bad, not the good. You can and should put a positive spin on it or try to mask it some, but someone is more likely to remember the one time he had to recompile the kernel for Wi-Fi and not the 100 times they saved their buddies' files from their broken Windows box. Yeah. With that out of the way, I will agree that it would do us all well to tone down on the friendly fire. Linux people and BSD people are on the same side and just have different philosophies on how to accomplish their goals of freedom, and that's okay. That honestly is my major suggestion on getting converts. Remember, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing in the freedom dimension, and with that, it's not a contest. When we bump into the place where BSD is better, we show off that workload. Same for Linux. We want everyone to succeed because it improves our overall goal, and in the longer run, monocultures are bad. My final thought here is on the licensing thing. I've always looked at it in a force and violence lens. The BSD license is the non-violent. You'll get more files, flies with honey sorta approach. It's coming from Berkeley, is like to call it the hippie approach. GPL is the militant approach of what we think you're all untrustworthy assholes who we will force you to be free, or else. I personally believe in the MIT/BSD approach and MIT license my stuff, but both are valid and probably needed, honestly. Well, I'm starting to ramble, so I'll just say cheers, guys, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, so thanks for writing in, Jason. And yes, I think you're right about people remember the pain more than the joyful moments.
Yeah, somehow that sticks more than the successes you had. It's, maybe wired this way.
So next up, we have feedback from Matt. Matt says, "Hi all. On last week's show, although I guess it was 2 months ago now, you requested positive reasons to switch to BSD, so I thought I'd write in with one positive data point about the BSD community. I wrote an application I thought would be of use to others beyond just myself, so I started to think about distro packaging. Ubuntu seems to be the largest in mindshare these days, so I started the process of packaging it up for Debian. If you've never tried to package something for Debian before, it's a little weird. A little like being repeatedly told your princess is in another castle. While I was still in the midst of this, a stranger filed a curious bug report against my project in which they indicated that their platform was FreeBSD. In investigating this, I realized that they were in the process of packaging my application for FreeBSD. My application ended up being packaged and shipped in FreeBSD by this helpful stranger before I was even halfway through the process of getting it on Debian. For me, this interaction really showcased the generosity and friendliness of the BSD community."
Okay, yeah, that's good feedback. I know different distros have different ways of getting code in or contributions, but yeah, this is a general feedback that we get that it's fairly straightforward to create a port or have someone take care of a port that's been submitted. Okay, then we have Brad about Linux versus the BSDs. Brad writes here that, "Hey JT, Benedict, and Alan. JT, you were asking for how people talk about Linux versus BSD. I guess an excerpt of my original story would be how I discuss it. I have been doing Linux for almost 26 years. Interspersed with those are various other Unixes, DEC Unix, SunOS, BSDI, Solaris, AIX, HPUX, etc. So I was mostly running Debian Linux at home and Ubuntu at work. And then along came systemd. Aside from the fact that it shot 25 years of muscle memory, service foo start became systemctl start foo to serve Pöttering's hubris. XXX part of Unix is also a broken concept, by the way. Here, I'll fix it for you. Only systemd is buggy and broken, and there are several cases where the team closed valid bugs because they didn't want to fix it. And worst of all, they have a major case of mission creep. I heard an interview with Pöttering in which he said that they wanted systemd to, quote, own everything between the kernel and the application layer, unquote. Compared to FreeBSD, which has native ZFS, meaning that I can roll back an upgrade that goes sideways. I can run the vast majority of apps that I did on Linux. The only app that had no equivalent for my wife was TV Time, V4L TV watching app. She didn't like any of the BSD alternatives. Okay. Plus, the BSD community seems more mature than the Linux community. Fewer flame wars, more cooperation, fewer cries of RTFM or ignored requests. But as I tell people, I'm not going to try to force you to change. I'll extol the virtues of BSD, or whatever subject du jour, but never try to force the issue. You do too, and I'll do mine. You do yours, and I'll do mine.
Well, thanks for the feedback, Brad. Next, we got a long one here from MJ. He says he enjoyed the show, as always, but to his why should you migrate from Linux to FreeBSD was covered relatively poorly, apparently. They have a couple of points. They say Linux is fragmented. And they say JT goes on to say this is not really so, that variations are overwhelmingly about installed packages, and packages are all the same. Though, the 900 different versions of Debian may still make your brain ache, but it's, they are still just Debian with just different default packages and so on. Package managers, that's a whole thing. And they talk about switching from NetBSD to FreeBSD and how ports and packages are basically the same. That's not actually true. Package source is quite a bit different from ports, even just where the files end up and some of it. The concepts are similar, but I imagine in the end the differences are about as big as from apt to yum or whatever.
Yeah, it's different. You don't get the same result, especially when config files are concerned.
And then you have the issue with different versions of the Linux kernel. It's like, well, yes, every distro is using a different kernel, and that's not the same thing. And he said it's like saying you can take code from Darwin and run it on FreeBSD. It may have similar origins, but that's where the similarities end. I'm afraid your argument is wrong. They mostly talk about the fact that compilers use different macros. I didn't know there was a separate Debian Linux macro, but I suppose that might make sense. So their second point, they say that Linux has been hijacked. I think the original author is drawing a long bow here, but he just does raise relevant points and seems to have been dismissed too easily. It's also a bad topic title, when in fact it seems to mean that the Linux ecosystem comprising userland and kernel. The influence on the subsystems around the kernel are indeed a worry for people wanting choice. The Red Hat IBM control of systemd is rather insidious. The scope creep of the project alone is astonishing, and so on. I think the better example that I saw of that was some of the network subsystem stuff, and where university or something is doing some research in the network stack, and they have some interesting code to upstream. And the maintainer happens to work for Google, and Google's like, well, we did a slightly different implementation of that, and we're going to use that in Linux. We're not going to, commit it for 6 or 9 months, but we're not going to take your version either, because we're going to use ours, even though you can't have ours right now.
Yeah. Heard that before.
And they also talked about licensing problems. And they say licensing is like politics. We shouldn't discuss it in civil conversation. So then in their summary at the end, they say, so why I would suggest using one of the BSDs over Linux is you're getting an entire OS. You can make build world, ports and packages are integrated, and so on. You get a lightweight kernel. Linux is bloat. I don't know. The FreeBSD kernel is pretty big, but you have great documentation. You don't have systemd, and at his job, their FreeBSD shop with some Linux VMs, and I don't need to sell ice to an Eskimo.
Well, yeah. Okay, that's also some valid points here in the feedback. Thanks for that.
And I think JT had some more responses to this feedback, but he put them in a paste bin that disappeared.
Okay, too bad. Then we go with the next one, with Ben, with feedback for this episode, or to JT specifically. Ben writes, "Hi BSD Now team. I just wanted to say well done to JT on his episode. I really enjoyed it. Okay. I found JT to be well prepared, articulate, and unbiased, all of which are great characteristics for a podcast." Whoa, now you're telling me? Okay. Please don't read into this that I'm saying you other hosts are not these things. I just wanted to pass on my congrats to JT. Please come back on. Okay. Yeah, that's direct feedback to him. Thanks for that as well. And the last that we have about this is why you should migrate everything to BSD from Henrik. Henrik writes, "Hey JT, Benedict, and Alan. A couple of weeks ago, you asked the community for feedback on an article about switching everything from Linux to BSD. The short answer is you shouldn't. The slightly longer answer is that they are both great and have different strengths, and you should run the operating system that is right for your needs. So if you are the only one in the team that knows BSD, it might not be the right tool for the job." I largely agree completely with JT's points of view. The article don't really get the point across, because the people that would be on the fence would have stopped reading long before the actually valid reasons for changing came on. I have been running Linux, mostly Debian, for as long as I can remember, but have slowly moved almost everything over to BSD now. BSD now. Okay. This transition started when I upgraded my fiber connection from 100 megs to 10 gigs. Oh, wow. With OFC, or which OFC, made my firewall servers a more interesting target. This resulted in that my Debian firewall from time to time died under the constant attacks. It never got compromised, but died for various other reasons. I then installed an OpenBSD and configured PF on the same hardware and didn't experience any problems with the attacks anymore, even though the amount didn't increase at all. I have since then installed another OpenBSD box, configured carp, and a lot of other stuff. I then started to play with ZFS, first in my Debian KVM hypervisor, and then thought it would try out FreeBSD instead, so I built a data storage server with FreeBSD on it and moved all data from the now 2 KVM machines to the FreeBSD and shared the data over NFS v4 on a dedicated 802.1x VLAN. After this, more and more of my systems magically got converted from Debian to BSD. Can't really exactly explain why, but I just feel that I get more flexibility, new packages, and faster response times when I do on my Debian counterparts, even though it's the same software running. I think this might be because the overhead is smaller on the BSDs than on the Linuxes. The only thing still running Debian exclusively is my KVM hypervisor. I have moved a lot of stuff to jails, but the things that still needs the hypervisor is running on Linux.
Thank you, Henrik.
All right, now after this feedback section, it's time for the Beastie Bits this week. We found a couple items that are of interest to you, hopefully. The first is SSH copy ID is now included. This is from Dragonfly BSD.
Yep, so they've basically built the SSH copy ID utility into Dragonfly 5.8 and in current. So on those releases, that tool is just built in instead of having to be installed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very helpful. Of course, you can do it without SSH copy ID, but it's just much easier than copying and doing the cat and pipe and stuff. So yeah.
Yep. And then OpenSense has a quick reliability release, especially with doing the impossible providing VPN for road warriors and whatnot. So they fixed the matching group common name case and sensitivity problem, adding a pluggable log format parsing facility, updating the comments in the OpenSSL config file, fix missing default gateway switch on the link up event, some firewall fixes like flush the priority selection to the debug rules and do not escape internal URLs, adding virtual IPv6 pool for mobile clients for IPsec. They fixed the help text regarding routes on OpenVPN and added the Sunny Valley and Moonin plugin updates.
Oh, good.
Oh, and fixed the Wake on LAN plugin so that you can wake your router up remotely.
Good. In case it ever goes to sleep.
Well, I think it's more you use this plugin to wake up other computers. You leave your router on all the time.
Right.
But, if you turn your computer off when you go to a conference, which is a reasonable thing to do, you don't expect to need it, but then suddenly you need it, you can connect to your router and say, hey, wake up that computer in my basement.
Yeah, that's a good use case. So good to have this in OpenSense. Done with this. We're now, this is a nice thing. We found a collection of pre-built BSD cloud images. This is over at bsd-cloud-image.org. So they have the major BSD ones, I would say, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, and Dragonfly in their latest versions. And you can just download them in QCOW2 image formats. And I guess they will be updated once a new release is coming out.
Yeah, well, I noticed that it's FreeBSD is still 11.2 and 11.3 is out.
Oh, right.
I didn't catch the Dragonfly article, but it sounds like 5.8 is almost out. And we just talked about NetBSD 8.2, although, it's only been a couple of days. So the NetBSD one, I could definitely forgive them for.
Okay, so they get mostly updated images for you. These unofficial images, they write, are tested on OpenStack and NoCloud with the Vert Lightning software package. Since they integrate Cloud-init, should support all the main cloud providers.
And if you click the details thing, they do actually link to GitHub where they have their scripts that do all this. And so you can also make suggestions or fixes or whatever as well.
Oh, yeah. Or add your favorite BSD that's not on the list at the moment.
Although all the major ones are. But if you wanted to, make it, for example, work with FreeBSD snapshots, if you want to, run head in the VM.
Yeah, or whatever it might be, some other BSD that is maybe a desktop distribution in case you want to run that in the cloud, whatever it might be. So our last item here is more for the terminal type folks, and you're among them. An instant terminal sharing way using tmux, of course. It's teammate.io. And sometimes you want to share the screen or your terminal with a colleague or with a student, maybe showing something. And so you can both see what the other person is typing. And that's what Teammate is doing. It's basically a fork of tmux. Teammate and tmux can coexist on the same system, so you don't have to give up the one for the other. And they provide various packages for all the BSDs, a couple of popular Linux distributions, as well as Mac OS. And you basically, once it installed, launch Teammate, and then you should see basically a screen where you can connect to each other. And we get a little URL, well, not so little. And this allows others to join your terminal session. And all users see the same terminal content at the same time. And this is like for pair programming or where two people share the same screen, but have different keyboards. So this might come in handy if you're doing some kind of, training or teaching. Or let's meet on this server and I show you the error that I got, something like this. So yeah, try it out, check out the website, and maybe it will come in handy for you. All right, this is our actual feedback and questions section. Remember the one we did earlier? Thanks again for people who keep sending us feedback and questions for this segment. Remember everything that you want to have us cover or at least mention or have a topic, a little article that you found. Maybe you wrote it yourself. Send all of this to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and then it will appear in a future episode like the ones we did earlier. The first one that we have is from Alice about manually verifying signature files for packages. So PKG packages. Alice writes, "Thank you very much for the great podcast." You're welcome. "After using Linux for many years, thanks to OpenSense, I recently discovered the BSD world and it's really exciting." Ah, good. "Now you would be so kind and help me answer one package question." Sure. "I have one OpenSense box that can't have internet access and I need to install OS-WireGuard plugin on it. I managed to do it by fetching OS-WireGuard plugin and all dependencies on a different internet-connected OpenSense box and installing it over shell on the offline box. The only thing I don't know yet is when I tried to check signature of those packages on my Linux box." Ah, yes. So he tried SHA-256 some with a couple of removing some stuff from it. And checking that signature and piping it again to verify it on packages in the SIG files that are downloaded from package.opensense.org to verify that the fetched files on my USB stick were not replaced by something I don't want. Based on my research, this would work, but I always get verification failure message. Could you help, please?"
So what are you verifying? Like, my impression of the way that the package signing in PKG worked was the actual digests file that's part of the index of the package repo is the only file that's actually signed. And it just contains the hashes. And so to check the hash of a particular file, you'd have to extract that database. You would verify the signature on the package database itself.
The whole thing.
The digest file from the package repo. That's the thing you can verify with the signature. And then its content just has what the correct hash is. I don't think the signature file, like each individual package is itself not signed. But you have bash.txz.sig. Where is that coming from?
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's just the example?
Yeah. But yes, I think the problem they're running into is that the each individual package itself is not signed. Okay, hold on. In the OpenSense repo, it appears there is a .sig file for every package. Is that normally there in FreeBSD? I don't think it is. In which case, if OpenSense is doing their own thing, I have no idea how they're doing that.
Yeah. If you have multiple pipes with these, there's sometimes the way where you removing the \n or not will definitely change the signature. So to get different checksums. You have a TR in there to remove the \n, and then followed by a set.
Right, but I don't think that's the problem.
Don't think so? Yeah. Because that's usually what's happened. Oh, you forgot the \n, and it's a completely different signature then.
Well, so they're removing that from the checksum itself, not from the content of the file. Yeah, so in a regular FreeBSD package repo, in the root, there is a file called digests.txz, and it is just the hashes of all the files, and the content of that itself is what is signed, not each individual package. And so there's no .sig file for each individual file. So I don't know what OpenSense is doing differently. But the answer is something. So I don't know how you verify their things individually.
Do we have a different suggestion how you would do it on this offline box instead of doing the USB stick thing?
Not really.
So you could definitely build those packages manually, right? On that box, on the target machine, getting the source files.
On the Linux box, you could run PKG itself and have it do the fetching, and it would, I think it verifies the signature and everything at the end of the download. So if you just used package install F, which is fetch only, you could have it download the bash5.txz and verify its signature on a Linux box by running the package tool on it pointed to the right repo. But I'm sure that's not the answer they're looking for.
Or like using ports collection, just make install, make configure the usual old way.
The problem there is that you have ports depends on being able to download.
Right. You can't get out. Yeah.
So in regular FreeBSD, you'd have to download the digest.txz and get the right hash out of it and then verify that it's the one that the file had. For OpenSense, I don't know. I'm guessing if they have a .sig file for each thing, it might actually be expecting the input to be the whole package file, not just the SHA-256 of it.
Could be, yeah.
I don't actually know what the OpenSense people are doing. I've never actually seen this before. What is inside one of these .sig files? Yeah, it's a full signature. So it's probably of the whole TXZ file, not of just the hash. So what you have might be right, except for you just want to feed the whole bash.txz into that OpenSSH or OpenSSL command rather than just the checksum of it.
Okay.
That might solve the problem.
Okay, yeah. Otherwise, ask the folks themselves.
The OpenSense, because what they're doing is different from what FreeBSD does by default.
That's all we can help you with. I hope that gets you somewhere. Try the whole file, not just the individual stick file. Okay, thanks for this question. Hopefully your adventures in the BSD land will continue. And next up is Shodi with something about the YubiKey. Goes like this. In the latest episode, latest-ish, there's a section about security or encryption, and you mentioned YubiKey as an example of a USB key. I've been studying password managers and USB keys, and I'm wondering why you'd mention YubiKey for a number of reasons. As I understand it, YubiKey is closed source, while NitroKey and LibramKey is open source, and these open source products seem to be shouted down because of all the press about YubiKey. I figure there may be a good reason YubiKey is top dog. If there is, I would love to know what it is. Thanks for the great show.
I don't actually know. Our friend Benno works at YubiKey now, but that's about all I know. We got one of the free-ish keys at EuroBSDCon last year, right?
Yes. I know that the YubiKey software, like the YubiKey configure and some YubiKey settings, are in the ports collection. So that's right there for you. Not sure about the other two keys you mentioned. It's probably popularity, and the more popular one thing is that the higher chance that you get the software also ported to BSDs. But that doesn't mean that the other keys are of less value or less secure or anything. It's just YubiKey is very popular, and I've heard it more than the other two. But if the other twos are doing the same thing for you, then by all means use those. This is your personal choice. It was just our first thing when it comes to mind, like what kind of crypto key can I get? Maybe you'll find some comparison on the web where you can see what the different features are. Definitely having open source is a good thing, but the YubiKey folks are fairly responsive as far as I could get it about things. Of course, it's a security key. They can only open it so far. But yeah, use what works for you, and the other keys are definitely also working quite well. Okay, thanks for this feedback. And the next and last is Mike with a site for hashes from old disks. Disks meaning, of course, the usual BSD distros that have been out.
What they mean physical, like CD-ROMs.
Oh yes, yeah, right. The ones you can touch. So Mike writes, you mentioned in episode 333 an archive project that is collecting hashes from old disks. Please let me know a link to that initiative. I could not find any info on this mentioned in the show notes. We did some digging and we linked the answer, of course, also in the show notes here. So here we give you a big list of FreeBSD ISOs and their hashes. Let's see, where does it start?
Right. So, for example, the FreeBSD 1.0-release i386 disk1.iso, and they have the size and hashes from some different places. For example, the Walnut Creek archive copy seems to have a different SHA-256 than the copies on the FTP archive mirror. So, it needs some other people's input to figure out which one of them might be right. Or if we're end up check something slightly different, because one of these sets is the physical CDs versus the ISO images, and maybe we're not creating the ISO exactly right, or whatever. But yes, there's basically each version and what the different checksums are.
Okay, there are definitely a couple of blanks. And
so yes, if you have physical disks or whatever, they'd be very interested in knowing what your copy checksums as.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there are instructions how you can get those, and they welcome, of course, contributions to this list. Okay, then thanks for this question. And that pretty much wraps up this week's episode of BSD Now. Thank you for listening. Definitely stay inside for a little while longer, and definitely keep yourself safe from harm, of course, and any kind of harm. And wait for us until next week when we have a new episode out.